The rain hammered against the bulletproof windows of the black Mercedes as it climbed the winding mountain road outside Seoul. In the back seat, Kim Tae-jin, the most feared mafia boss in South Korea, sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched so tight it could crack diamonds. Beside him, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket, his 8-year-old daughter Min-seo shivered with fever, her small body trembling against the leather seat. The girl's eyes, once bright and full of life, now glazed over with illness and confusion as she whispered, "Oppa, where are we going?" Tae-jin didn't answer. He couldn't, because what he was about to do would haunt him for the rest of his life. Before we dive into this devastating story of betrayal, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between father and daughter, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that even the most ruthless person deserves a chance at redemption, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories about the hidden humanity in the darkest hearts deserve to be told, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The year was 2008, and Kim Tae-jin ruled the criminal underworld of Seoul with an iron fist. His organization, the Baiko clan, controlled everything from the gambling dens in Gangnam to the shipping ports in Bison. Politicians feared him. Rival gangs avoided his territory. The police looked the other way when his name was mentioned. He had built an empire on blood, intimidation, and an absolute refusal to show weakness. Weakness, in his world, meant death. Min-seo was born from his brief marriage to Song Ji-woo, a classical pianist he had met during a charity concert his organization was using to launder money. Ji-woo was everything Tae-jin wasn't: gentle, cultured, filled with dreams of beauty and art. For 2 years, she tried to pull him away from the darkness. She failed. When Min-seo was 3, Ji-woo died in a car accident, an accident Tae-jin always suspected was arranged by his enemies to send him a message. After that, he became even colder, more ruthless, pushing deeper into the shadows he knew best. But Min-seo, his little girl with her mother's gentle eyes and sweet smile, she was the one crack in his armor. Every time he looked at her, he saw Ji-woo. Every time she laughed, something inside his frozen heart tried to thaw. His lieutenants noticed, his rivals noticed, and in the brutal hierarchy of the Korean underworld, that made her a liability. 6 months before that rainy night, Min-seo had been diagnosed with a rare heart condition. The doctors said she needed surgery, expensive surgery that even Tae-jin's wealth couldn't guarantee would succeed. But worse than the medical bills was the attention. Rival gangs began circling, seeing the sick child at the perfect pressure point. Kidnapping attempts followed. Threats arrived daily. One morning, Tae-jin found a white chrysanthemum, the Korean symbol of death, placed on Min-seo's school desk with a note that read, "The girl pays for the father's sins." His advisor, an old enforcer named Park Dong-chol, had been blunt during their meeting in the underground office beneath a noodle shop in Itaewon. "Boss, she's your weakness. Every enemy knows it. As long as she's with you, they'll use her. You need to make a choice, your empire or your daughter." Tae-jin had slammed his fist on the table so hard the wood cracked, but he knew Park was right. In his world, love was a weapon your enemies wielded against you. That's how he found himself on that mountain road, driving toward the remote Buddhist temple of Heinse, hidden deep in the mountains of South Gyeongsang province. The temple was ancient, isolated, and most importantly, off the grid. The monks there were known for their silence and their compassion. They took in orphans, gave sanctuary to those running from violence. Tae-jin had made arrangements with the head monk, Venerable Master Shin, leaving an envelope with enough money to care for Min-seo for decades. He told himself this was mercy. He told himself she would be safer here than anywhere near him. He told himself a lot of lies that night. When they arrived at the temple gates, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Tae-jin carried Min-seo, still wrapped in the hospital blanket, up the stone steps. She was so light in his arms, burning with fever, barely conscious. Master Shin waited at the entrance, his weathered face showing no judgment, only sadness. "She will be safe here," the monk said quietly. "But are you certain this is the path you choose?" Tae-jin's throat was too tight to speak. He simply nodded. He laid Min-seo down on a simple mat in one of the temple rooms. For a moment, he knelt beside her, brushing her sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him with such trust, such pure love, that something inside him shattered. "Oppa," she whispered, "are you leaving me?" He wanted to say no. He wanted to say he would stay forever, protect her, be the father she deserved. Instead, he said, "You need to rest. The monks will take care of you. Be strong, Min-seo." She tried to reach for his hand, but he was already standing, already walking away. He heard her cry out for him as he descended the steps, each sob like a knife to his chest. But he didn't turn back, couldn't turn back. He climbed into the Mercedes, ordered his driver to go, and never looked through the rear window. The next 15 years turned Kim Tae-jin into a legend and a monster. Without the vulnerability of caring for his daughter, he became unstoppable. He crushed rival gangs, expanded his territory into Japan and China, built a network of corruption so vast it reached into the highest levels of government. The Baiko clan became the most powerful criminal organization in East Asia. Politicians attended his private parties. Prosecutors buried cases against him. He owned nightclubs, casinos, construction companies, all fronts for an empire built on extortion, smuggling, and violence. But he never smiled, never laughed. His penthouse apartment in Gangnam, 40 floors above the city, was filled with expensive art and designer furniture, but it felt like a mausoleum. Every night, he would pour himself a glass of whiskey and stand at the window, looking out at Seoul's glittering lights, wondering if somewhere in those mountains, his daughter was still alive. He never contacted the temple, never sent letters or asked for updates. He told himself it was for her safety, that any connection to him would put her in danger. But the truth he couldn't face, was that he was a coward. He had abandoned his child, and he didn't know how to live with what he'd done. So he buried it under layers of power, money, and violence. His reputation grew. People called him the Ice King, a man without emotions, without weakness. They were wrong. He was drowning in emotions. He just couldn't let anyone see. His organization continued to thrive. Park Dong-chol, now his second in command, handled the day-to-day operations with brutal efficiency. They moved into cybercrime, using hackers to steal data and blackmail corporations. They partnered with Russian and Chinese syndicates to smuggle weapons and drugs. The money poured in faster than they could count it. Tae-jin became one of the wealthiest men in Korea. Though none of his fortune was legitimate, he wore custom suits from Milan, drove cars worth more than houses, surrounded himself with bodyguards and sycophants. But in the quiet moments, late at night, when the whiskey couldn't numb the pain, he would open his desk drawer and look at the only photograph he kept, Min-seo at age 5, smiling in her mother's arms, taken 3 years before everything fell apart. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in April, 15 years after that rainy night. Tae-jin was in his office, reviewing shipping manifests for a container shipment from Shanghai that actually contained smuggled electronics, when his private line rang. Only 5 people had that number, and 3 of them were dead. "Yes," he answered coldly. The voice on the other end was elderly, trembling with age, but firm with purpose. "Is this Kim Tae-jin?" It was Master Shin. Tae-jin's blood turned to ice. "What happened? Is she?" He couldn't finish the question. "She's alive," the monk said quickly. "But you need to come. There is something you must see, something you must know." Tae-jin made the drive in 2 hours, pushing his car to dangerous speeds on the mountain roads. His mind raced with possibilities. Was Min-seo sick again? Had someone found her? Was she in danger? When he arrived at Heinze Temple, Master Shin was waiting, but his expression wasn't one of crisis. It was something else, sorrow mixed with something that might have been disappointment. "Follow me," the monk said simply. They walked through the temple grounds, past meditation halls and ancient stone lanterns, until they reached a small courtyard. And there she was, Min-seo, but not the 8-year-old girl he remembered. She was 23 now, a young woman with her mother's grace and beauty, sitting on a stone bench, feeding rice to the temple birds. She wore simple grey robes, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, her face serene and thoughtful. She was alive. She was healthy. She was beautiful. And when Master Shin called her name, and she turned to look at Tae-jin, her eyes held no recognition at all. Min-seo, the monk said gently, "This is Kim Tae-jin. He knew your parents." Tae-jin felt like he'd been shot. She didn't know. She didn't remember. Master Shin saw the realization on his face and gestured for him to follow away from the courtyard. When they were alone, the monk explained, "The fever she had that night was worse than you knew. It caused encephalitis, inflammation of the brain. We rushed her to the hospital in the valley, and she survived. But she lost most of her memories from before. She doesn't remember her mother. She doesn't remember you. We raised her here, in the temple. She believes her parents died when she was very young, and we became her family." Tae-jin's legs nearly gave out. He had abandoned his daughter to protect her, and she had forgotten he ever existed. "Why didn't you tell me?" he rasped. "You never asked," Master Shin replied, not unkindly. "You brought her here and disappeared. We assumed you wanted no contact. When she woke from the illness and couldn't remember, we made a choice to let her have peace, to give her a simple life, free from whatever darkness you were protecting her from." The monk paused, then added, "She has been happy here. She helps in the gardens, teaches the young children, studies Buddhism. She is kind, gentle, everything her mother must have been. Do you really want to disturb that peace with the truth?" Tae-jin looked back toward the courtyard, where Min-seo was laughing as a bird landed on her outstretched hand. She was everything he wasn't, pure where he was corrupt, peaceful where he was violent, whole where he was broken. Can I speak with her?" he asked. Master Shin considered this. "You can speak with her as a visitor, but I ask you to think carefully about what you say. The truth could shatter the peace she's built." Tae-jin approached the courtyard slowly, each step feeling like walking toward his own execution. When Min-seo looked up and smiled at him, that same sweet smile from her childhood, he nearly broke down. "Hello," she said kindly. "Are you visiting the temple?" Her voice was soft, musical, just like her mother's. "Yes," Tae-jin managed. "I heard this was a place of healing." Min-seo nodded. "It is. I've lived here most of my life. The monks saved me when I was very sick. I don't remember much from before, but I'm grateful for the life they've given me." They talked for an hour. Min-seo told him about her daily routine, the meditation practice, the vegetable garden she tended, the children she taught reading and writing. She asked him about his life, and he lied, saying he was a businessman from Seoul, successful but searching for meaning. She listened with genuine interest, offering insights about finding purpose beyond material success that cut him to the bone. When it was time to leave, she touched his hand gently. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said. "Sometimes the peace we seek is in letting go of the things we think define us." Tae-jin left the temple that day destroyed, not by violence or betrayal, but by the crushing weight of a truth he couldn't escape. His daughter was alive, healthy, and happy, but only because he wasn't in her life. He had become exactly what he feared, a poison that destroyed everything he touched. Over the following months, Tae-jin returned to the temple again and again, always as Mr. Kim, the businessman seeking spiritual guidance. Min-seo welcomed him each time, and slowly they built a friendship. She would tell him stories about the temple, about the monk's wisdom, about finding joy in simplicity. He would listen, soaking in every word, memorizing every expression, trying to fill the 15-year void in his heart. But the guilt ate at him like acid. He watched her tend the gardens with such care, watched her help elderly monks with such patience, watched her laugh with such pure joy. And he knew he had no right to this. He had thrown her away like garbage, and only by a miracle had she survived and thrived. Then came the day that everything collapsed. Tae-jin had been careless, to focus on his secret visits to Min-seo, to notice the threats closing in. A rival organization, the Jade Dragon Triad from China, had been moving into his territory, and he'd ignored the warning signs. They wanted war, and they knew exactly how to hurt him. Someone had been watching. Someone had followed him to the temple. Someone had figured out who Min-seo really was. The attack came on a warm June evening. Tae-jin was in Seoul, meeting with his lieutenants, when Park burst into the room, his face ashen. "Boss, we have a problem. The Chinese, they found the temple. They're moving on it now." Tae-jin's blood turned to ice. "How many?" "A dozen men, maybe more." "Boss, they know about the girl." Tae-jin moved faster than he had in years. He grabbed weapons, called every available soldier, and raced toward the mountains. His mind was screaming with only one thought: not again, not again. I won't lose her again. The drive felt eternal, every second an agony. When they finally reached the temple road, he could see smoke rising above the trees. The main gate was blown open, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the sacred grounds. Tae-jin charged in with his men, and what he saw ignited a fury he'd never known. The temple was under siege. Monks lay injured on the ground. The beautiful gardens were torn apart, and in the center courtyard, surrounded by armed men, Min-seo knelt with her hands bound, her face bruised and terrified. The leader of the Chinese group, a scarred man named Wu Chen, grinned when he saw Tae-jin. "Ice King, finally, you show emotion. Is this girl really worth your empire?" Tae-jin's voice was death itself. "Let her go. This is between us." Wu laughed. "Oh, I don't think so. See, we did our research. This is your daughter, the one you abandoned 15 years ago. Quite the story. The ruthless mafia boss who threw away his own child. What do you think she'll say when she finds out who you really are?" Min-seo's eyes widened, looking between Wu and Tae-jin. What is he talking about? Tae-jin couldn't breathe. This was the moment he dreaded. The truth, delivered not with compassion, but as a weapon. Wu continued, clearly enjoying himself. "This man, this Mr. Kim who's been visiting you, he's Kim Tae-jin, the head of the Baiko clan, and he's your father. He dumped you here as a sick child, and never looked back." The devastation on Min-seo's face was worse than any bullet. "No," she whispered. "That's not. Is it true?" Tae-jin wanted to lie, wanted to deny it, but he couldn't, not anymore. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking for the first time in 15 years. "It's true. I am your father, and I left you here because I was a coward who chose power over family." Everything he said is true. Min-seo's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "How could you?" Wu raised his gun toward Min-seo's head. "Touching reunion. Now, you have a choice, Ice King, your empire or her life. Sign over your territories, your operations, everything, or she dies." What happened next became legend in the Korean underworld. Tae-jin, the man who had never shown weakness, who had built an empire on the principle that nothing mattered more than power, did something no one expected. He knelt, in front of his enemies, in front of his men, in front of his daughter. Kim Tae-jin, the Ice King, knelt on the ground and bowed his head. "Take it all," he said. "Every territory, every operation, everyone. It's yours. Just let her live." His own lieutenants gasped. Park stepped forward. "Boss, you can't. I can and I will." Tae-jin roared. "I spent 15 years building an empire I never wanted, protecting power that means nothing, becoming a monster to avoid being human. And for what? So I could lose the only thing that ever mattered. No more. I'm done." He looked at Min-seo, tears now flowing freely down his scarred, hardened face. "I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. I thought I was protecting you by sending you away, but I was just protecting myself from having to be a real father. I chose violence over love, power over family, and I've regretted it every single day since. If I could go back, if I could change it, I would. But I can't. All I can do now is make sure you survive, even if you hate me forever." Wu seemed genuinely shocked. "You're serious? You'd actually give up everything?" "Everything," Tae-jin confirmed. "Take it. Just let her go." For a long moment, Wu considered. Then he lowered his gun and laughed, a genuine, almost respectful sound. "You know what, Ice King? I believe you. And because of that, because you finally showed you're human, I'm going to let you both walk away. No empire is worth what I just saw. A man willing to lose everything for his child. That's real power." Wu and his men left, disappearing into the mountains as quickly as they'd come. Tae-jin's organization would fall apart in the following weeks, devoured by rivals and torn apart by federal investigations that had been waiting for any sign of weakness. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Tae-jin crawled to Min-seo, cut her bonds with shaking hands, and for the first time in 15 years, pulled his daughter into his arms. She didn't pull away. She collapsed against him, sobbing, and he held her like he should have done all those years ago. "I'm sorry," he whispered over and over. "I'm so sorry." Master Shin approached them slowly, his face showing a mix of sorrow and strange satisfaction. "The Buddha teaches that we must lose everything to find what truly matters. Today, Kim Tae-jin, you lost an empire, but found your soul. The question now is, what will you do with it?" Over the next year, the transformation of Kim Tae-jin became a different kind of legend. He surrendered to authorities, confessing to decades of crimes, cooperating with investigations in exchange for protection for his former victims. He spent 18 months in prison, using the time to study, reflect, and write letters to Min-seo, letters he never sent because he didn't feel he'd earned the right. When he was released, his fortune seized by the government, his reputation destroyed, his empire dust. He had nothing but the clothes on his back and a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood of Seoul. Min-seo came to see him 3 days after his release. She stood in the doorway of his tiny studio apartment, this beautiful young woman in simple clothes, looking at this broken, humbled man who was her father. "Can I come in?" she asked. He nodded, unable to speak. They sat at his small table, and for a long time, neither said anything. Finally, Min-seo broke the silence. "Master Shin told me something before I came here. He said that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing a different future." She reached across the table and took his weathered hand. "I don't remember being 8 years old. I don't remember you leaving me. But I remember these last few months, watching you give up everything, seeing you face justice, reading in the news about you helping prosecutors bring down the organizations you built. That person, that's who you are now." Tae-jin's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Min-seo said honestly. "But you're trying to earn it. That has to count for something." She paused, then added, "Master Shin also told me something else. He said that family isn't just about blood or about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You showed up when it mattered most. You chose me over everything. That's a start." They began to rebuild their relationship slowly, carefully, like two strangers learning to trust. Tae-jin got a job as a warehouse worker, manual labor that left him exhausted, but gave him honest pay. Min-seo continued living at the temple, but visited him every week. They would have simple meals together, walk in the park, talk about everything and nothing. He told her stories about her mother, about Ji-woo's kindness and talent. She taught him meditation techniques, helping him find peace with the violence of his past. 2 years after that day in the temple, on Min-seo's 25th birthday, Tae-jin took her to a small cemetery outside Seoul. They stood before 2 graves, one marked with Ji-woo's name, the other still blank. "This is your mother's resting place," he said quietly. "I bought the plot next to hers years ago. I always knew I'd end up here eventually." Min-seo knelt and placed flowers on her mother's grave. "Tell me about her," she said. And Tae-jin did. He talked 4 hours, sharing memories he'd locked away for decades. He told her about Ji-woo's laugh, her terrible cooking, the way she would play piano at midnight when she couldn't sleep. He told her about their wedding, small and secret, and about the day Min-seo was born, how he'd held this tiny perfect being and felt terrified of how much she loved her. "Your mother would be proud of who you've become," he said finally. "I know I am." Min-seo looked at him, and for the first time, He saw not forgiveness in her eyes, but something even more powerful, understanding. She'd be proud of you too, she said, not for what you were, but for what you chose to become. Today, Kim Tae-jin lives a quiet life far from the empire he once ruled. He works at a community center, helping former criminals reintegrate into society, using his experience to guide others away from the path he took. Min-seo left the temple and now runs a non-profit that provides education and support to children of incarcerated parents. They have dinner together every Sunday, a sacred tradition neither of them breaks. Sometimes, late at night, Tae-jin still wakes from nightmares about that rainy night on the mountain, about the sound of Min-seo crying as he walked away. But now, when morning comes, he can call her. He can hear her voice. He can say "I love you" and know she understands he means it. The story of Kim Tae-jin reminds us that we are not defined by our worst moments, but by what we choose to do after them. That power and wealth mean nothing compared to the love of those we've hurt. That it's never too late to choose differently, to be better, to fight for redemption even when we don't deserve it. Most importantly, his story shows us that real strength isn't found in ruling an empire of fear. Real strength is kneeling before your enemies and choosing love over everything else. Real strength is facing the person you've hurt most and asking, not for forgiveness, but for the chance to do better. If you were in Tae-jin's position all those years ago, would you have had the courage to choose differently from the start? Or does redemption only mean something when we've fallen as far as we can go? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of a broken man finding his way back to his daughter moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe to K-Mafia Stories. We bring you tales of darkness and light, of choices and consequences, of the thin line between monster and man. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to change, that love can survive even the deepest betrayal, and that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. Thank you for watching, and remember, the heaviest chains we carry are the ones we forge ourselves, and only we have the key to break them free. 3 years after that birthday visit to the cemetery, life had settled into a peaceful rhythm for Kim Tae-jin and his daughter Min-seo. But in the world of organized crime, the past never truly stays buried. What neither of them knew was that the story they thought had ended was actually just beginning, and the choices Tae-jin made decades ago were about to come back in ways that would test everything they had rebuilt. It started with a photograph slipped under Tae-jin's apartment door on a cold November morning. He almost missed it, would have stepped right over it on his way to work, but something made him pause. The envelope was expensive, cream-colored paper with no markings, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and aged, showing a young man who looked startlingly like Tae-jin at 25, standing next to a woman he didn't recognize. On the back, written in careful Korean script, were 4 words that made his blood run cold. "Your son is coming." Tae-jin's hands trembled as he stared at the photo. A son. It was impossible. After Ji-woo died, he had never been with anyone else, never allowed himself that kind of connection. But this photo was dated 1995, 2 years before he even met Ji-woo. Back when he was just a low-level enforcer, climbing the ranks of what would become the Baiko clan. His mind raced back to those chaotic years. The violence, the constant movement, the jobs that took him all over Asia. And then he remembered Osaka, a 3-month assignment protecting a weapons shipment, and a young woman named Yuki. She had been a translator, hired by the Japanese syndicate he was working with. Quiet, intelligent, with eyes that saw too much. They had spent long nights together while Tae-jin waited for shipments to arrive, talking about everything and nothing, and eventually, inevitably, it had become more. But when the job ended, he had left. No goodbyes, no promises, no looking back. That was the man he had been then. Someone who moved through life leaving wreckage in his wake. Could Yuki have been pregnant? Could she have had his child and never told him? And if so, why was this son reaching out now, after all these years? Tae-jin immediately went to the one person he trusted with information like this. Park Dong-chul, his former second-in-command, had also left the criminal world after Tae-jin's organization collapsed. Now Park ran a small private investigation agency, helping people find missing family members and solve cold cases. When Tae-jin showed him the photograph, Park's weathered face went pale. "Boss, Tae-jin, I need to tell you something. About 6 months ago, someone came to my office asking questions about you. He didn't give his name, but he had your eyes, your build. He wanted to know everything. Where you lived, what you did, whether you had family. I didn't tell him anything, told him to leave, but he said he'd be back when the time was right. Why didn't you tell me?" Tae-jin demanded. Park looked away, guilt written across his face. "Because I didn't want to disrupt what you'd built with Min-seo. You were finally healing, finally becoming the man you should have been. I thought if I ignored it, he'd go away." Tae-jin wanted to be angry, but he understood. Park had been trying to protect him, just like he had always done. "Find him," Tae-jin said quietly. "I need to know who he is, what he wants, and whether Min-seo is in danger." Park nodded and got to work immediately, calling in favors from his old contacts, running database searches, following digital trails. What he found was disturbing. The young man's name was Kim Renji, 27 years old, born in Osaka to Nakamura Yuki, who had died of cancer 8 years ago. According to the records Park dug up, Renji had grown up in poverty, raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to support them. But what was truly alarming was Renji's recent history. 2 years ago, he had suddenly appeared on the radar of Japanese law enforcement as an associate of the Yamaguchi-gumi, one of Japan's largest yakuza organizations. He had been linked to several violent incidents, including the murder of a rival gang member in Osaka. He was skilled, ruthless, and by all accounts, unstable. And now he was in Seoul, looking for the father who had abandoned him before he was born. Tae-jin made a decision. Before Renji could make contact on his own terms, Tae-jin would find him first. He left a message through one of Park's contacts, a simple meeting place and time, neutral ground, a public park in the middle of the day, surrounded by families and tourists, safe enough that violence would be noticed, open enough that both men could see they weren't walking into a trap. When the day arrived, Tae-jin showed up early, positioning himself on a bench with a clear view of all approaches. His heart hammered in his chest, a feeling he thought he'd left behind with his old life. At exactly 2 o'clock, a young man approached, and Tae-jin knew instantly it was him. Renji was tall and lean, dressed in an expensive leather jacket and designer jeans, his hair styled in the current fashion. But his face was like looking into a mirror of the past. The same sharp jawline, the same intense dark eyes, the same way of moving with coiled tension. Just beneath the surface, he sat down on the bench without being invited, maintaining a careful distance, and for a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, Renji broke the silence, his Korean fluent but accented. "So you're the great Kim Tae-jin, the Ice King. My mother told me stories about you, but I always thought you were just a myth she invented to explain why I had no father." "I didn't know about you," Tae-jin said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "If I had, you would have what?" Renji interrupted, his voice sharp with barely contained rage. "Come back for us, taken us away from the tiny apartment in Osaka, where my mother worked herself to death, given me the family life you gave your other daughter before you abandoned her too." The words hit like physical blows, but Tae-jin didn't flinch. He deserved every bit of Renji's anger. "You're right. I was a terrible father. I made choices that destroyed lives, including yours and your mother's. I can't change the past, but I'm trying to do better now. If you're here for money, I don't have any. If you're here for revenge, I won't stop you. But if you're here because you want to know your father, then I'm willing to try." Renji laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "You think I want your money? Your pathetic redemption story. I have money. I have power. I built it myself, just like you did, by doing what needed to be done." He leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "I came here for one reason only, to destroy everything you love. The way you destroyed my mother's life and mine." Tae-jin's blood went cold. "Min-seo has nothing to do with this. She's innocent." "So was I," Renji shot back. "So was my mother. But that didn't stop you from ruining our lives. Now you get to feel what that's like. You get to watch someone you love suffer because of who you are, what you've done." Before Tae-jin could respond, Renji stood up and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Tae-jin sat frozen on the bench, his mind racing. Renji wasn't just angry. He was dangerous, trained, and clearly had resources. The threat was real, and Min-seo was directly in his crosshairs. Tae-jin immediately called Park. "We need protection for Min-seo now, and I need to know everything about Renji's connections in Seoul. If he's working with someone here, I need to know who." Park was already ahead of him. "I'm on it. But boss, there's something else you need to know. Renji isn't working alone. According to my sources, he's partnered with someone from your past. Someone who has their own reasons to want you to suffer." The name, when Park finally said it, made Tae-jin's world tilt. Lee Sang-hyen. Lee Sang-hyen had been one of Tae-jin's closest allies 20 years ago, a brilliant strategist who helped build the Baiko clan into what it became. But there had been a betrayal, money that went missing, accusations that flew both ways, and ultimately, Tae-jin had ordered Sang-hyen expelled from the organization, stripped of rank and respect. Sang-hyen had sworn revenge, but then he had vanished, and Tae-jin had assumed he'd moved on, started a new life somewhere else. He had been wrong. Sang-hyen had spent 2 decades building his own network, smaller than what the Baiko clan had been, but sophisticated and connected throughout East Asia. And now he had found the perfect weapon to use against Tae-jin, his abandoned son, filled with rage and hungry for vengeance. Tae-jin, he couldn't handle this alone. He had to tell Min-seo, had to warn her about the danger, even if it meant revealing parts of his past he had hoped to keep buried. That evening, he went to her apartment, a small but comfortable place near the non-profit office where she worked. She knew immediately something was wrong. "Oppa, what happened? You look terrible." He told her everything. About Yuki, about Renji, about the threats and the alliance with Lee Sang-hyen. He watched her face as she processed it all, saw the hurt flash across her features when she realized he had another child, one who grew up in even worse circumstances than she had. "So I have a brother," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "A brother who wants to hurt us because of what you did." "I'm sorry," Tae-jin said, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. "I keep thinking I've accounted for all the damage I caused, paid for all my sins, but they just keep coming. If you want to distance yourself from me, disappear until this is over, I would understand. I would help make it happen." Min-seo was quiet for a long time, staring out her window at the Seoul skyline. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. "No, I'm not running, and neither are you. This Renji, he's family, whether he wants to be or not. Maybe he needs to know that not everyone will abandon him, that he has a sister who understands what it feels like to be thrown away." Tae-jin felt a surge of pride and fear. Min-seo, he's dangerous. He's been trained by the Yakuza, and he's allied with people who know how to hurt us in ways you can't imagine. "Then we'll have to be smarter," she replied. "Oppa, you spent decades building criminal empires, manipulating situations, staying 3 steps ahead of your enemies. Use those skills now, not for power or money, but to save your family, both of your children." She was right. Tae-jin had spent so long trying to forget who he had been that he'd forgotten he possessed skills that could be used for good. He wasn't the Ice King anymore, but he still knew how these people thought, how they operated, what they feared. If Renji and Sang-hyen wanted a war, they would get one, but not the kind they expected. Over the next week, Tae-jin reached out to his old network, not the criminals, but the people who had left that life behind like he had. Former lieutenants who now ran legitimate businesses, ex-enforcers who had become security consultants, hackers who had gone straight and now worked in cybersecurity. One by one, he called in old favors and promised new ones, building a team not to destroy his enemies, but to protect his family and, if possible, save his son from the path of destruction. He was on dot at the same time. Park was working his contacts in law enforcement. If Renji and Sang Hyun were planning something big, there would be traces, digital footprints, communications that could be intercepted. What they discovered was chilling. Sang Hyun had been building toward this moment for years, not just targeting Tae-jin, but planning to use this opportunity to take over what was left of the Seoul underworld. Renji was the perfect cover, a personal vendetta that would distract from Sang Hyun's larger ambitions. The plan, as near as they could piece together, was to kidnap Min-seo, force Tae-jin into a public confrontation, and in the chaos that followed, eliminate several other criminal leaders who stood in Sang Hyun's way. It was ambitious, ruthless, and terrifyingly well planned, but there was one thing Sang Hyun hadn't counted on. Min-seo wasn't the helpless victim he assumed she would be. Years of martial arts training at the temple had left her skilled in self-defense, and her work with at-risk youth had taught her how to read people, how to de-escalate situations, how to find common ground even with hostile individuals. When Tae-jin tried to insist she go into hiding, she refused. If I hide, Renji wins. He gets to see me as just another rich girl being protected by daddy's money and connections. But if I meet him, if I talk to him as his sister, maybe I can reach the person my mother's son used to be before rage took over. The meeting was arranged through careful negotiation. Neutral ground again. This time a small tea house in Insadong, traditional and public, but quiet enough for private conversation. Tae-jin wanted to be there, but Min-seo insisted she go alone. He'll never be honest if you're hovering. He needs to see me as separate from you, as my own person, not just your daughter. Park positioned his people around the area, close enough to intervene if things went wrong, but far enough away to give them space. And Tae-jin waited in a van 2 blocks away, listening to the audio feed from the wire Min-seo wore, every muscle tense with the effort of not rushing to her side. When Renji arrived, he looked surprised to see Min-seo alone. He sat down across from her, his posture defensive, his eyes constantly scanning for a trap. "Where's our father?" he asked, the word father dripping with sarcasm. "I asked him not to come," Min-seo replied calmly. "This conversation isn't about him, it's about us, about what we both lost, and what we might be able to find," Renji scoffed. "And what did you lose, princess? You grew up in a temple, got a second chance at life with daddy after he suddenly grew a conscience. Meanwhile, I watched my mother die because we couldn't afford decent healthcare. Don't pretend we're the same." "You're right," Min-seo said quietly. "We're not the same. Our experiences were different, but we do have one thing in common. We were both abandoned by the same selfish man who thought power mattered more than family." Renji's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected her to agree. "And we both had mothers who loved us desperately and died too young," Min-seo continued. "Your mother, Yuki, she raised you alone, worked herself to exhaustion, gave you everything she could. My mother, Ji-woo, she tried to save our father from himself and died because of the enemies his choices made. They deserved better. We deserved better." For the first time, Renji's carefully controlled mask slipped, and Min-seo saw the pain beneath the rage. "My mother told me about him. You know," Renji said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "She said he was the only man she ever loved, that he had honor and strength, and that someday he would come back for us. She believed that lie until the day she died, even when it was obvious he had forgotten we ever existed." Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them back angrily. "I hate him for what he did to her, for the hope he gave her that kept her from moving on, from finding someone who would actually love her back." Min-seo reached across the table and did something completely unexpected. She took Renji's hand. "Then hate him. You have every right to." But don't let that hate define the rest of your life. Don't let it turn you into the same kind of man who destroys the people around him. Renji tried to pull his hand away, but she held firm. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to see that there's another option. You have a sister now. Someone who understands, who won't judge you for being angry, who wants to know the person you could be if you weren't carrying all this rage. Why? Renji demanded, his voice breaking. Why would you want anything to do with me? I came here to hurt you, to make you suffer. I know, Min-seo said gently. But you haven't. You could have already done terrible things. But instead, you're sitting here having tea with me. That tells me there's still part of you that wants something different, something more than revenge. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Slowly, painfully, Renji began to open up about his childhood, about watching his mother struggle, about the rage that had consumed him when she died, and he realized no one was coming to help them. He talked about joining the Yakuza, about finding purpose in violence, about building the skills and connections that finally made him feel powerful, of helpless, and Min-seo listened, really listened, sharing her own story in return. She told him about waking up in the temple with no memories, about the years of confusion and emptiness, about learning that her father had thrown her away. She told him about the confrontation 3 years ago, about watching Tae-jin give up everything to save her, and about the slow, difficult process of learning to trust again. I won't lie to you, she said. Our father destroyed a lot of lives, including ours. Nothing changes that. But I've learned that people can change if they choose to. And I've learned that holding on to hate only poisons the person carrying it. By the time they left the tea house, nothing was resolved. But something had shifted. Renji hadn't agreed to abandon his vendetta. But he had agreed to meet with Min-seo again. It was a start, a tiny crack in the armor of rage he had built around himself. But Lee Sang-hyun wasn't interested in reconciliation or healing. When he learned about the meeting, learned that Renji was wavering, he moved up his timeline. The attack came the following night, coordinated and brutal, hitting multiple targets simultaneously to maximize chaos and prevent Tae-jin's people from responding effectively. Min-seo's apartment building was firebombed. She survived only because Park's team had insisted she stay at a safe house that night. Tae-jin's community center was destroyed. Years of work helping former criminals rehabilitate themselves burned to ash, and 3 of Tae-jin's former allies, people who had left the criminal world behind and built legitimate lives, were murdered in their homes. The message was clear. Sang-hyun was done with games. This was total war, and no one connected to Tae-jin would be safe. The next morning, as Tae-jin stood in the smoldering ruins of his community center, staring at the ashes of everything he had built to atone for his past, Renji appeared beside him. The young man looked shaken, his confident facade cracked. I didn't know he was going to do this, Renji said quietly. Sang-hyun told me it would be surgical, targeted, just you and your daughter. Not this, not innocent people. Tae-jin turned to look at his son, really look at him, and saw a young man teetering on the edge of becoming the same monster Tae-jin had been. Then help me stop him, Tae-jin said. You're inside his operation. You know his plans, his resources, his weaknesses. Help me end this before more people die. Renji was silent for a long time, staring at the ruins. Finally, he spoke. If I do this, it's not for you. It's for my mother, who deserved better than the life you gave her. And it's for my sister, who somehow still sees good in people when she should know better. What followed was a dangerous 3-day operation that brought together an unlikely alliance. Tae-jin's reformed criminals, Park's investigators, Renji's inside information, and cooperation from law enforcement who wanted to bring down Sang-hyun's growing empire. They discovered that Sang-hyun had been planning a massive arms deal, weapons smuggled from Russia through North Korea and into Seoul, intended to supply criminal organizations throughout East Asia. The deal was happening in 2 days at a warehouse complex near Incheonport. If they could disrupt it, catch Sang-hyun in the act, they could end his organization and the threat to Tae-jin's one operation but it was a trap. Sang Hyun had suspected Renji turn on him, and he had prepared accordingly. When Tae-jin, Renji, and their small team arrived at the warehouse, they found not a weapons deal but an ambush. Dozens of armed men, explosive charges rigged throughout the building, and Sang Hyun himself waiting with Min-seo as his hostage. She had been taken from the safe house, betrayed by someone they had trusted. Now she knelt on the concrete floor, hands bound, a gun pressed to her head. Kim Tae-jin, Sang Hyun called out, his voice echoing through the empty warehouse. Finally, we reached the end. You destroyed my life 20 years ago, stripped me of everything I had built. Now I return the favor. Watch your children die, knowing it's all your fault, just like everything else. The standoff that followed felt eternal. Sang Hyun's men had them surrounded, outgunned, and trapped. Police were on their way, but they would never arrive in time. Tae-jin could see only two choices: watch his children die or sacrifice himself, and hope Sang Hyun honored a deal to let them go. Neither option was acceptable. But then Renji stepped forward. "Let me offer you a different deal," he said to Sang Hyun. "You wanted to destroy Tae-jin by taking away what he loves. Well, here I am, his son, the one who came to Seoul filled with hate, ready to help you get your revenge. But I've changed my mind, so take me instead. Let my sister go, and I'll give you what you really want. The son of Kim Tae-jin, dead by your hand. The ultimate revenge, Renji." "No." Both Tae-jin and Min-seo shouted simultaneously, but Renji ignored them, walking steadily towards Sang Hyun, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. "Come on," he called. "Isn't this what revenge is about? Making him feel the loss, the pain. Kill me, and he loses a son he just found. That's got to be worth more than killing a daughter he's had years to bond with." Sang Hyun considered this, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You make a compelling argument. Very well, the girl lives. But you're going to die slowly. And Daddy gets to watch." He lowered the gun from Min-seo's head and pointed it at Renji instead. What happened next would be talked about in Seoul's underground for years. As Sang Hyun pulled the trigger, Renji dropped and rolled with a speed that spoke of years of Yakuza training. The bullet missed, and in that split second of confusion, everything erupted. Tae-jin's team opened fire from their positions. Min-seo, who had been working on her bombs since the moment Renji started walking, broke free and tackled Sang Hyun's legs. And the police, who had actually arrived 10 minutes earlier and been coordinating with Park's people, breached through every entrance simultaneously. The firefight was brief but intense. When the smoke cleared, Sang Hyun was in custody. Most of his men were either dead or arrested, and remarkably, both Renji and Min-seo were alive and relatively unharmed. In the aftermath, as paramedics checked them over and police took statements, Tae-jin found himself standing between his two children. These two remarkable people who had every reason to hate him, but had instead chosen something better. Renji was the first to speak. "I still haven't forgiven you," he said to Tae-jin. "I don't know if I ever will. You weren't there for my mother when she needed you. You weren't there for me my entire life. That doesn't just go away." "I know," Tae-jin replied, "and I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just a chance to do better, to be someone you can both be proud of, eventually."